Dean of the Faculty of Law in ACU, and Professor Brian Fisher now going to introduce our guest speaker, and I would like to hand over for Brian to introduce our guest speaker. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Professor Ismail. It is really important thing for us to be doing is to be working with you, to run a joint event and to do something here at ACU between law and particularly your faculty and your centre. So that is a very positive thing. When I first started at ACU as the Dean of Law about 12 months ago, I discovered that Professor Ismail was here, very much to my delight, because when I came to ACU, a number of PhD students that I was supervising at the time were willing to come to ACU, but one of my PhD students who had come from Libya, who was at QUT, namely Ezieddin Elmahjub, was a bit reluctant to come to Australian Catholic University because he didn't know much about it. And when I found that Professor Ismail was here, one of the first things I did was to ask Ez to come to Melbourne and to meet with Professor Ismail and discuss his thesis. And he found out that Professor Ismail has got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge around Islamic law and around the issues that Ez was wanting to research. So the two of them, immediately from the point they met, were very, very good friends, and it has led to Professor Ismail giving some very detailed and very constructive feedback on his thesis. So that's where part of this relationship starts. Ezieddin Elmahjub, who is presenting today, came from Libya to do a PhD with me about 3.5 years ago. Very enthusiastic young man. One of those PhD candidates that comes to you and says, I know everything, I can do anything, it must be done. And you have to say, yes, but it's going to take you 3 or 4 years to get to the point where it will be completed. And we managed to bottle his enthusiasm, and he's embarked on a very interesting thesis, which largely he'll be discussing today as he goes through his talk. He has also lived, like a number of other people here, through a very close connection, but a remote location through the Libyan revolution in the last couple of years. And while he was very, very much engaged in the discussion in Australia, as I think, Kerry, you're here as well, through student protest and student advocacy on the issues that were happening in Libya. You've been involved a lot in Australia, and also I think in the process of rebuilding in Libya. And Ez has just spent 6 months, about two months in Libya and 2 months in Egypt over the last 6 months. And he's very closely connected with one of the political parties that's involved with the Justice and Construction Party, which is involved with the rebuilding of Libya after the revolution. So he brings many different things to his research. He's interested in policy, he's interested in politics, he's also very interested in law. He's been working as a law lecturer in Tripoli, and he brings all this together in his thesis around intellectual property and how it sits really with Islamic law and Sharia law. And I think today you will talk to us more about that. So we welcome you.
Thanks, Brian.
And we wait to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
In the name of God, the most merciful and most gracious, I would like to thank Professor Ismail and Professor Brian Fitzgerald for giving me the opportunity to share with you some of the things that I learned through the 2.5 years in my research. Our topic for today is promoting innovation and creativity and Islamic perspective. People in my country wanted Sharia to be the main source of legislation. Some of them even wanted Sharia to be the only source of legislation. I did not understand how could we implement rules or principles of 1400 years into the modern day law and policy making. So I done some research. I discovered that Islamic Sharia has 2 kinds of sources. Textual sources, which are the Quran and Sunnah, and non-textual sources, which are for example, legal analogy, public consideration of public interest, and scholarly consensus. The non-secondary sources was developed to face the challenges which are not regulated in Quran and Sunnah. After the death of the Prophet, we believe as Muslims that the revelation ceased to come from God. So we have to legislate for the community because lots of races entered in. I came to understand that Islamic Sharia is not a specific code of law that asks somebody to do certain actions and refrain from others. It's basically a set of principles and objectives. The policy making and the law making from Islamic perspective subject to considerations of certain principles and objectives. For example, if you read the Quran and Sunnah, you will find things related to marriage, inheritance, dealt with specifically. But in general, you will find principles from the verses of Quran and the sayings and actions of the Prophet. Those principles revolve around freedom, around equality, dignity, respect, justice, the consideration of the common good, and other things. Also, the lawmaking subject to 5 main objectives. The early scholars like Imam Shatibi and Ezieddin Elmahjub, who lived and died during the 11th and 12th century, they discovered from this, the textual sources, Quran and Sunnah, that Islamic Sharia is based on bringing about welfare and preventing harm from society through safeguarding religion, the human life, intellect, lineage, and wealth. I wanted to make sure how the objectives and principles would legislate for modern time. I was really lucky enough to study very important area for modern economy and try to implement what I have learned from my study of Islamic Sharia and try to relate it to innovation and creativity, which are the driving factor of the modern economies. As you probably many know, Muslims contributed to the progress of humanity during the after the 8th century up to the 14th and 15th century. For John Randall, the author of The Making of Modern Wine, stated that Muslims created a civilization in which science had ceased to be a mere lure and had been applied to the arts and crafts of practical life and to the immediate surface of humankind. I have a video which demonstrates what Randall says. It's really long video, so I have to skip it because Professor Ismail told me that we don't have enough time.
You should show us a bit.
Sorry?
Can you show us a
Okay,
bit?
I'll do that. Right. Is it?
Do you want to come out there?
So Sarah, your group has the ancient Greeks. Ravi, you've got the Romans. And Danny's group gets, yes, a bit of a challenge for you. You get the Middle Ages. Some even call it the Dark Ages. Boring. See how you get on.
Yes, miss.
So, sorry, yes.
Sorry to bother you.
What do you want?
We need to find out what impact the Dark Ages had on the modern world.
Never was a period of history so poorly named. Don't touch. It's priceless. And I suppose someone's been filling your head with the usual nonsense, eh? 1,000 wasted years. A black hole in history, am I right?
Yeah, sort of.
You see, it's always the same. You assume it was all mud, disease, death and destruction, with marauding mobs of barbarians ripping down the good of former civilizations, burning and plundering as they went, nothing of any worth invented either, eh? Oh, no. Go on, be off with you.
Sorry to bother you.
Come on, it's probably not worth it. Everyone knows that the Greeks and Romans invented everything anyway.
Oh, did they now? And you're sure about that, are you? You know, I might just have something for you. You seem to be up to the task. I suppose I could. Follow me. I've got just the book for you.
Where are we going?
Don't know.
Ask him.
Excuse me, where are we going?
From darkness into light, my young friend. From ocean onto land, there are things you should know. Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Now, I know I left it around here somewhere. Ah! If you dare.
What's going on?
Welcome to the Dark Ages, or as it should be known, the Golden Ages.
Who are you?
I am Al-Jazari, engineer and ingenious inventor.
I thought you said this was the Dark Ages. It doesn't look very dark.
That's because it's all a matter of perspective, my soon-to-be illuminated friend. Of course, there are parts of the world that weren't dark at all, but in a civilization that stretched from Spain to China, the golden rays of discovery and invention shone over everything.
What civilization?
The Muslim civilization, my young friend. Through scholars and scientists of various faiths, some of the most important discoveries known to man were made at this time. Discoveries that drew on knowledge of the ancients, but have more connections with your modern world than you could possibly ever imagine.
Like what?
Well, all sorts of things.
I've got to get a picture of this.
I knew it was a good idea.
Who are you?
Allow me to introduce Ibn al-Haytham, a great scientist whose ideas led to the invention of the camera.
You invented the camera.
I laid the foundations for modern cameras by explaining how our eyes work. I found a way of projecting an image onto another surface through a small hole in a dark room, later called camera obscura.
Think of all the things that evolved from this discovery. Cameras, cinema, all share the same principle. Cool. Look out below!
Who's that?
That's my good friend, Abbas ibn Farnas, who gazed up to the heavens, passionate in his belief that man could fly.
Whoa.
Indeed, he dared to dream about flying 1,000 years before the Wright brothers. Do you know you all take your jet-setting holidays for granted, so it only seems fair?
Viewed to the current debate regarding the regulation of innovation and creativity. The current regulation of innovation and creativity is, regulated under IB treaties, international IB treaties, for example, Berne Convention for Copyright, Paris Convention for Industrial Property, and the TRIPS. Those regulations actually attracted wide criticism from scholars from different universities, some from Harvard and Oxford and other universities in Europe and America and even Australia, for unduly placing knowledge and culture in closed circles and rendering them as unused means for promoting welfare, also for concentrating knowledge and cultural resources in the hands of few people in society, and also they are negatively linked to the driving factors of development such as education, health, and economic growth. I would like to explore how Islamic Sharia would contribute to the current debate on the best possible approach in the regulation of knowledge and cultural production. Actually, the Islamic approach is based on striking a balance between the human disposition to own things and own knowledge resource, inventions, and artistic works, and the public interest. This is manifested in Quran in chapter 28, verse 77, which says that seek through that wealth which Allah has given you the hope of the hereafter, and yet do not forget your share of the world, and do good as Allah has done good to you, and desire not corruption in the land. Indeed, Allah does not love corruptors. I found that there are 5 principles which could be relevant to the regulation of innovation and creativity. These are stewardship, which we call khilafa, and I'll be explaining them one by one. Non-concentration principle, social justice, dissemination of knowledge, and attribution and integrity. I find through my readings in Quran and Sunnah and other scholarly works that these 5 principles, if considered, will contribute to making better environment for the flourishing of innovation and creativity. I found as well that they bear great similarities with influential philosophical trend in the West, led by John Rawls in his book Theory of Justice and Justice as Fairness. The first principles, which would be relevant to the regulation of knowledge and culture, is the stewardship or khilafa. This very fundamental principle in the Quran, which says that the ownership of resources and end products are for Allah, and who created those resources, and the humans who labor on those resources. Allah says in the Quran, believe in Allah and His Messenger, and spend out of that which He has made you successors. For those who have believed among you and spend, there will be great reward. The ownership of resources is not confined only to tangible assets. Some verses of the Quran reveals that it is equally extended to knowledge. For example, the angels, when addressed God, they said, "Exalted are you, we have no knowledge except what you have taught us. Indeed, it is you who are the knowing, the wise." The implications of these principles for the regulation of knowledge runs like that. It recognizes that the ownership of knowledge for Allah and individuals should be granted title over their intellectual creations. This is the most important part, which is exploiting the title has to be consistent with the dictates of Islamic Sharia. This, very relevant to the other principles. Once you believe that everything belongs to Allah, you should accept just regulations, which sometimes might take some of your resources for the public good. Denying absolute ownership of knowledge resources is not confined to Islamic Sharia. Some of the ideas brought by John Rawls says that the talents we have, the knowledge we have, it's not something we inherently deserve. It's conferred, it's given to us by random luck. So he justifies, according to this principle, the state intervention through legislation to take some of these resources if they are meant to promote the public interest, especially to promote the interests of the destitute. The other principle is the non-concentration principle. Islamic Sharia condemns accumulating wealth, excessively accumulated wealth, to the extent that goes far beyond the needs of the individual, and impinge on the other's interest. Actually, the exercise of the excessive concentration of property and wealth is likely to undermine fair equality of opportunity. This is what John Rawls stated in his book Justice as Fairness. So Islamic Sharia aims to circulate wealth within society, including knowledge resources. If you know how to develop certain drug, if you know how to manufacture a device, this is good. At some point, you have to share your knowledge with the rest of community. History proves that the more ideas shared, the more prosperity, the more inventions are brought to society. The third principle is social justice. Islamic Sharia perceives the allocation of resources for public welfare as a fundamental part in the function of wealth within society. The best way to reallocate wealth is by sharing this wealth with others. There are several manifestations of sharing throughout the literature of Islamic Sharia. For example, we have the concept of takaful, which means solidarity or community. An aspect of it in alimony, which we call nafaqa, mandatory alimony, and waqf, religious endowment, and zakat, where Muslims are obliged, according to direct and definitive texts, to share some of their wealth, 2.5 to 10%, with the destitute in society. Here as well, Islamic Sharia intersects with some of Rawls' idea. Rawls says that the considerations of justice are more important than the considerations of economic efficiency. So he says that society is well ordered when it's not only structured to advance the economic interests of individuals, but also when it is constructed by public conception of justice. The fourth principles, which I think are relevant to the regulation of innovation and creativity, is the Islamic principle regarding dissemination of knowledge. Islamic Sharia, through various hadiths of the Prophet, strongly condemns the concealment of knowledge and strongly promotes sharing knowledge with others. The hadith of the Prophet puts sharing knowledge with others as charity which will get reward in the hereafter. We will see that sharing knowledge with others is even beneficial for promoting innovation and creativity. The last principle is the attribution and integrity. Sharing knowledge with others does not mean denying the ownership, the moral rights of the first inventor or creator of the text or the invention, the artistic work or the invention. The Quran in various verses, also the Sunnah, strongly condemns attributing the work of others to someone who did not really create the work. Even discrete science called ilm al-jarh wa ta'dil, science of hadith authenticity, was developed in order to maintain the chains of narrators from the Prophet, peace be upon him. Now we'll come to Sharia-friendly regulation for innovation and creativity. Obviously, the sources of Islamic Sharia does not inform us how to specifically construct appropriate system for the regulation of innovation and creativity. However, it does refer us to the people of knowledge who are well versed in their disciplines, and they know the best possible methods of designing intellectual property systems. For example, the Sharia principles, which I just explained to you, intersects with various scholars from different institutions around the world, like, for example, Loris Lessing and Yukai Winkler from Harvard, Jessica Littman and Boyle from Duke, Mark Chon from Seattle, and Netanel from Stanford, and Peter Draus. Those scholars actually criticized the current regulation of innovation and creativity for its unjust owner-centered approach, and proposed alternative models based on sharing and collaboration and participation. Actually, they also considered knowledge as a resource for progress, and therefore recognized the concept of rights for society in intellectual creations, which we know in IB literature as public domain. They also recognized developmental needs of less affluent nations, as I explained earlier, that the current IB system is regarded as negatively linked to the driving factor of development, like health and education, access to educational resources, and economic growth. So those scholars tried to propose a more development-oriented system. Those scholars also offered a system which is promote the user rights of innovation and creativity. The first proposals which made by some of these scholars revolves around expanding the public domain of ideas and expressions. The first policy measure which they proposed is preventing the undue blurring and displacing of important materials from the public domain. I call this adopting anti-enclosure movement. Many scholars argue that IB, since the inception of the first treaties in the 19th centuries, expanded to encompass ideas and expressions which should be left in the public domain. So they proposed anti-enclosure measures. For example, they said that IB legislation should not be based on faith, but should be based on statistics. If we want to protect a new idea, we should understand the economic efficiency of protecting this idea as opposite to leaving it open for everyone to use and capitalize and build upon. They also proposed sound and fair reforms to the current for the current system. For example, they've seen that the copyright